Before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his time had come to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them fully. Jesus and his disciples were sharing the evening meal. The devil had already provoked Judas, Simon Iscariot's son, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew the Father had given everything into his hands and that he had come from God and now was returning to God. So he got up from the table and took off his robes. Picking up a linen towel, he tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a wash basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he was wearing. After he washed the disciples' feet, he put on his robes and returned to his place at the table. He said to them, "Do you know what I have done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you speak correctly because I am. If I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you too must wash each other's feet. As I have given you an example, just as I have done, you also must do."
After he said these things, Jesus was deeply disturbed and testified. "I assure you," he said, "one of you will betray me." His disciples looked at each other, confused about which of them he was talking about. One of the disciples, the one whom Jesus loved, was at Jesus' side. Simon Peter nodded at him to get him to ask Jesus who he was talking about. Leaning back toward Jesus, this disciple asked, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus answered, "It's the one to whom I will give this piece of bread once I have dipped into the bowl." Then he dipped the piece of bread and gave it to Judas. After Judas took the bread, Satan entered into him. Jesus told him, "What you are about to do, do quickly." No one sitting at the table understood why Jesus said this to him. Some thought, since Judas kept the money bag, Jesus told him, "Go buy what we need for the feast," or that he should give something to the poor. So when Judas took the bread, he left immediately, and it was night.
When Judas was gone, Jesus said, "Little children, I'm with you for a little while longer. You will look for me. But just as I told the religious leaders, I also tell you now, where I'm going, you can't come. I give you a new commandment. Love each other, just as I have loved you. So you always must love each other. This is how everyone will know that you are my disciples, when you love each other."
Simon Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, where are you going?" Jesus answered, "Where I am going, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow me later." Peter asked, "Lord, why can't I follow you now? I'll give up my life for you." Jesus replied, "Will you give up your life for me? I assure you that you will deny me 3 times before the rooster crows."
After this, Jesus said, "Don't be troubled. Trust in God. Trust also in me. My Father's house has room to spare. If that weren't the case, would I have told you that I'm going to prepare a place for you? When I go to prepare a place for you, I will return and take you to be with me, so that where I am, you will be too. You know the way to the place I'm going."
Thomas asked, "Lord, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way?"
Jesus answered, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. As the Father loved me, I too have loved you. Remain in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will remain in my love, just as I kept my Father's commandments and remain in his love. I've said these things to you so that my joy will be in you and your joy will be complete. This is my commandment. Love each other, just as I have loved you. No one has greater love than to give up one's life for one's friends."
After he said these things, Jesus went out with his disciples and crossed over to the other side of the Kidron Valley. He and his disciples entered a garden there.
Judas, his betrayer, also knew the place because Jesus often gathered there with his disciples. Judas brought a company of soldiers and some guards from the chief priests and Pharisees. They came there carrying lanterns, torches, and weapons.
Jesus knew everything that was to happen to him. So he went out and asked, "Who are you looking for?"
They answered, "Jesus, the Nazarene."
He said to them, "I am."
Judas, his betrayer, was standing with them. When he said, "I am," they shrank back and fell to the ground.
He asked them again, "Who are you looking for?"
They said, "Jesus, the Nazarene."
Jesus answered, "I told you, I am. If you were looking for me, then let these people go."
Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus told Peter, "Put your sword away. Am I not to drink the cup the Father has given me?" Then the company of soldiers, the commander, and the guards from the Jewish leaders took Jesus into custody.
Simon Peter and another disciple followed Jesus. Because this other disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard. However, Peter stood outside near the gate. Then the other disciple, the one known to the high priest, came out and spoke to the woman stationed at the gate, and she brought Peter in.
The servant woman stationed at the gate asked Peter, "Aren't you one of this man's disciples?"
"I'm not," he replied.
The servants and the guards had made a fire because it was cold. They were standing around it, warming themselves. Peter joined them there, standing by the fire, warming himself. They asked, "Aren't you one of his disciples?"
Peter denied it, saying, "I'm not."
A servant of the high priest, a relative of the one whose ear Peter had cut off, said to him, "Didn't I see you in the garden with him?"
Peter denied it again, and immediately a rooster crowed.
The religious leaders led Jesus from Caiaphas to the Roman governor's palace. Pilate went out to them and asked, "What charge do you bring against this man?"
They answered, "If he had done nothing wrong, we wouldn't have handed him over to you."
"Take him yourself and judge him according to your own law."
The religious leaders replied, "The law doesn't allow us to kill anyone."
Pilate went back into the palace. He summoned Jesus and asked, "Are you the king of the Jews?"
Jesus answered, "Do you say this on your own, or have others spoken to you about me?"
Pilate responded, "I'm not a Judean, am I? Your nation and its chief priests handed you over to me. What have you done?"
Jesus replied, "My kingdom doesn't originate from this world. If it did, my guards would fight so that I wouldn't have been arrested. My kingdom isn't from here."
"So you are a king," Pilate said.
Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. I was born and came into the world for this reason, to testify to the truth. Whoever accepts the truth listens to my voice."
"What is truth?" Pilate asked.
After Pilate said this, he returned to the Jewish leaders and said, "I find no grounds for any charge against him. You have a custom that I release one prisoner for you at Passover. Do you want me to release for you this king of the Jews?"
Not this man. Give us Barabbas. Barabbas, not Jesus. Give us Barabbas.
Now Barabbas was a violent outlaw, so Pilate gave orders for Jesus to be beaten with a whip. The soldiers made a crown out of thorn branches and put it on Jesus. Then they put on a purple robe. They came up to him and said, "Hey, you, King of the Jews!" They also hit him with their fists. Once again, Pilate came out. This time he said, "I will have Jesus brought out to you again, so you can see for yourselves that I have not found him guilty."
Jesus came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said, "Here's the man." When the chief priests and the temple police saw him, they yelled, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate told them, "You take him away and nail him to a cross. I don't find him guilty of anything." The crowd replied,
He claimed to be the Son of God. Our law says he must be put to death.
When Pilate heard this, he was terrified. He went back inside and asked Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus did not answer. "Why won't you answer my question?" Pilate asked. "Don't you know that I have the power to let you go free or to nail you to a cross?"
Jesus replied, "If God had not given you the power, you couldn't do anything at all to me. But the one who handed me over to you did something even worse." Then Pilate wanted to set Jesus free, but the crowd again yelled,
If you set this man free, you are no friend of the emperor. Anyone who claims to be a king is an enemy of the emperor.
When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out. Then he sat down on the judge's bench. It was about noon on the day before Passover, and Pilate said to the crowd, "Look at your king."
Kill him! Kill him! Crucify him! Put him to death! Execute him!
"So you want me to nail your king to a cross?" Pilate asked.
The chief priests replied, "The emperor is our king." Then Pilate handed Jesus over to be nailed to a cross.
Jesus was taken away, and he carried his cross to a place known as the Skull. In Aramaic, this place is called Golgotha. There Jesus was nailed to the cross, and on each side of him a man was nailed to a cross. Pilate ordered the charge against Jesus to be written on a board and put above the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews." The words were written in Hebrew, Latin, and Greek. The place where Jesus was taken wasn't far from the city, and many of the people read the charge against him. So the chief priests went to Pilate and said, "Why did you write that he is King of the Jews? You should have written, he claimed to be King of the Jews." But Pilate told them, "What is written will not be changed."
After the soldiers had nailed Jesus to the cross, they divided up his clothes into 4 parts, one for each of them. But his outer garment was made from one single piece of cloth and did not have any seams. The soldiers said to each other, "Let's not rip it apart. We will gamble to see who gets it." This happened so that the scriptures would come true, which say, "They divided up my clothes and gambled for my garments." The soldiers then did what they had decided.
Jesus' mother stood beside his cross with her sister and Mary, the wife of Clopas. Mary Magdalene was standing there too. When Jesus saw his mother and his favorite disciple with her, he said to his mother, "This man is now your son." Then he said to the disciple, "She is now your mother." From then on, that disciple took her into his own home.
Jesus knew that he had now finished his work. And in order to make the scriptures come true, he said, "I am thirsty." A jar of cheap wine was there. Someone then soaked a sponge with the wine and held it up to Jesus' mouth on the stem of a hibiscus plant. After Jesus drank the wine, he said, "It is finished." He bowed his head and died.
The next day would be both a Sabbath and a Passover. It was a special day for the Jewish people, and they did not want the bodies to stay on the crosses during that day. So they asked Pilate to break the men's legs and take their bodies down. The soldiers first broke the legs of the other two men who were nailed there. But when they came to Jesus, they saw that he was already dead, and they did not break his legs. One of the soldiers stuck his spear into Jesus' side. Blood and water came out. We know this is true because it was told by someone who saw it happen. Now you can have faith too. All this happened so that the scriptures would come true, which say, "No bone of his body will be broken," and "They will see the one in whose side they stuck a spear."
Joseph from Arimathea was one of Jesus' disciples. He had kept it secret, though, because he was afraid. But now he asked Pilate to let him have Jesus' body. Pilate gave him permission, and Joseph took it down from the cross.
Nicodemus also came with about 75 pounds of spices made from myrrh and aloes. This was the same Nicodemus who had visited Jesus one night. The two men wrapped the body in a linen cloth together with the spices, which was how Jewish people buried their dead. In the place where Jesus had been nailed to a cross, there was a garden with a tomb that had never been used. The tomb was nearby, and since it was the time to prepare for the Sabbath, they hurried to put Jesus' body there.
You've been listening to a special Palm Passion Sunday podcast of High Street Congregational Church, with our pastor, Reverend Stephen Carnahan, leading members of the congregation in a rendering of the Passion of Christ according to the Gospel of John. If you feel inspired by what you hear, we invite you to join us in person for worship services every Sunday morning beginning at 10 o'clock. Of course, you can always listen to our church sermons on the web. New sermons are posted every Monday by midday. Please take a moment to explore this website for more information about our church, or visit our Facebook page at High Street Congregational Church, UCC. We hope that God's presence will be known to you every hour of every day. May God's blessings rest upon you now and always. See you on Easter Sunday.